The Salem Village Witch Trials. A tale of terror and hysteria. The year is 1692, and a quiet, pious village in the Massachusetts Bay Colony will soon become the stage for one of the most infamous episodes of mass hysteria in American history. This is the tale of the Salem Village Witch Trials, where neighbor turned against neighbor. Accusations of witchcraft tore apart families, and the lurking shadow of dark, supernatural forces was blamed for their every misfortune. Who were the Puritans? The Puritans had come to the New World with a divine mission. In the early 1600s, they fled England, escaping religious persecution to establish a new Jerusalem in the wilderness of America. They believed they were God's chosen people, sent to create a perfect, godly society in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Their name, Puritans, came from their desire to purify the Church of England, to rid it of any remnants of Catholicism. To them, life was a constant battle between good and evil, light and darkness, and they believed that Satan himself was always lurking, ready to corrupt their souls. Salem Village, just a few miles away from the larger and more prosperous Salem town, was this small, isolated farming community. Life here was harsh. Its people were poor, often struggling to survive the bitter winters and failing crops. The winters were long and brutal, the soil was difficult to farm, and isolation from the larger town left the villagers vulnerable. Their lives were governed by the rhythms of the seasons and the unyielding demands of their religion. They believed every hardship was a test from God, and that failure might be a sign of the devil's influence. The Puritan way of life. For the Puritans, life was not about personal happiness or fulfillment. It was about duty. Duty to God, to family, and to the community. They believed that every aspect of their lives was preordained by God's will. Hard work, discipline, and obedience were essential virtues, and deviation from these values was seen as a sign of sin, or worse, a sign of the devil's influence. Their days began with prayer and ended with prayer. The Sabbath was strictly observed, with long church services and no room for idle activities. Entertainment, laughter, even dressing in colorful clothing were frowned upon. Everything they did was to glorify God. They lived under the constant threat of divine judgment. In their world, sin could bring down God's wrath on the entire community. If crops failed, if illness struck, if bad fortune befell the village, it was often seen as punishment for sin or worse, a sign that Satan had infiltrated their ranks. The Puritans believed that they were in a constant state of spiritual warfare, battling invisible forces of darkness. They took their scripture literally. The Bible told them that Satan roamed the earth, seeking souls to corrupt, and so they watched each other carefully for any signs of deviation, any hint that someone might be falling under the devil's sway. Social control and isolation. In Salem Village, everyone was expected to conform. The social fabric was tightly woven, with little room for individuality. Men were the heads of households, and women were expected to be submissive, tending to their families in silence. Children were to be seen and not heard, raised with a strict hand to fear God and respect authority. The village was small, and everyone knew each other's business. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Neighbors were always watching, and gossip spread like wildfire. Any deviation from the norm was viewed with suspicion. An unmarried woman, a beggar, a family that didn't attend church regularly, all were seen as potential threats to the community's moral order. This constant scrutiny bred a culture of fear. Salem Village was a place where tensions simmered just below the surface. Disputes over land, property, and social standing were common. but they often took on a darker tone in this atmosphere of rigid religious fervor. Old grudges and rivalries festered, and people began to see the hand of the devil in their everyday struggles. A world of superstition and fear. For the Puritans, the line between the physical world and the supernatural was thin. The devil and his demons were not abstract ideas. They were real, tangible threats. Witchcraft, they believed, was a tool Satan used to corrupt the faithful, and witches were his servants, sowing chaos and evil in the world. Signs of witchcraft were everywhere. Sick livestock, spoiled food, sudden illnesses, or strange behavior. The Puritans were deeply superstitious, and anything unexplained was often attributed to the work of Satan. In a world where science and medicine were rudimentary at best, every misfortune was given a spiritual explanation. They believed witches could cast spells, summon spirits, and harm others through their dark powers. The idea of a witch's mark, a physical sign of a pact with the devil, was deeply ingrained in their minds. Even the smallest anomaly on someone's body, like a birthmark or a mole, could be seen as proof of their connection to Satan. The Bible, their ultimate source of truth, warned them of witches. Exodus 22:18 was clear, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." In this world of strict religious dogma, suspicion of witchcraft became a deadly serious matter. The role of women and outsiders. The Puritan society was deeply patriarchal, and women were seen as more susceptible to the devil's influence. In Salem Village, women had little power or autonomy. They were expected to be pious and obedient, and any deviation from these expectations could arouse suspicion. Widows, unmarried women, and those who lived on the margins of society were particularly vulnerable. Women who did not conform to the strict social roles were often viewed with distrust. Their independence was seen as a threat to the established order. Outsiders were also viewed with suspicion. Anyone who didn't fit into the tightly knit social fabric of the village, whether due to their race, background, or beliefs, was easily seen as a potential agent of the devil. Tituba, an enslaved woman of Arawak or African descent, would later become one of the first to be accused, simply because of her foreignness. A perfect storm for hysteria. By 1692, Salem Village was a place on edge. Years of harsh winters, crop failures, and political instability had left the villagers in a fragile state. Old feuds between families, disputes over land, and tension with neighboring Salem town added to the strain. With all these tensions simmering, it wouldn't take much to push the community into hysteria. And when young girls began to exhibit strange, unexplainable behavior, the villagers found their answer. It wasn't bad luck, poor harvests, or personal failings causing their misery. It was Satan himself. The devil had come to Salem, and he had brought his witches with him. The stage is set. The Puritans of Salem Village living in a world of constant fear, fear of sin, fear of each other, and most of all, fear of the devil. Their rigid beliefs, their superstitions, and the harsh realities of their daily lives, making them vulnerable to the dark paranoia that was about to consume their community. As we venture deeper into the story of the Salem Witch Trials, remember that this was not just a tale of witches and magic. It was a tale of abject fear, fear that led to one of the darkest chapters in human history. The stage is set, and soon the hunt for witches will begin. The first signs of witchcraft. It began with two young girls. Elizabeth Betty Paris, just 9 years old, and her cousin Abigail Williams, 11. They were the daughter and niece of Reverend Samuel Paris, the stern, domineering minister of Salem Village. In the cold winter months, Betty and Abigail began behaving in strange, terrifying ways. They screamed uncontrollably. They convulsed on the floor, writhing as if in pain. Their limbs twisted into unnatural positions, and they spoke in tongues, uttering strange, incomprehensible sounds. Reverend Paris and the villagers were bewildered. What could be causing these horrifying symptoms? The local doctor, baffled, offered only one explanation: witchcraft. He stated that they were under the control of an evil hand, most likely a witch, or the devil himself. Soon, other girls in Salem Village began showing the same eerie symptoms. Anne Putnam, Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott each began to cry out in fits of hysteria. Their torments were vivid and terrifying to witness. It seemed the devil had come to Salem, corrupting the innocent and pure-hearted. The fingers of suspicion soon pointed to a woman living within the Paris household. Her name was Tituba. She was an enslaved woman brought from the West Indies, and her presence was already shrouded in mystery. The Puritans, fearful of the unknown, whispered that she practiced dark, forbidden magic from her homeland. Tituba had told stories of strange spirits and spells to the young girls, stories that seemed to take root in their minds. As the villagers looked for a scapegoat to explain the growing hysteria, Tituba became the perfect villain. The girls claimed that Tituba had bewitched them, using black magic to torment their bodies and souls. And when pressured under questioning, Tituba confessed. But her confession was no ordinary admission of guilt. She wove a tale of dark Sabbaths and witches' meetings in the woods. She described a tall man in black who commanded her to do his bidding, the devil himself. The villagers were terrified. Tituba's confession set off a chain reaction of fear. The village exploded into a frenzy of accusations. The girls began naming other witches, and the people of Salem turned against one another. No one was safe. The trials begin. By the spring of 1692, the Salem Village meeting house had been transformed into a courtroom. It was filled with the cries of the accused and the testimonies of the so-called afflicted. Among the first to be accused were Sarah Good, a homeless beggar; Sarah Osborne, a woman who had defied the village's expectations of her; and Tituba herself. As time passed, even morally upstanding citizens found themselves in the web of accusations, unable to free themselves from the momentum of the witch hunt. The trials were a spectacle of fear and superstition. Witnesses claimed they had seen these women flying through the air or sending their spectral forms to torment others. The evidence? Spectral evidence. The idea that a witch could send their spirit to harm others while their physical body remained elsewhere. It was impossible to disprove. One by one, the accused witches were brought before the court, and one by one they were condemned. By the time the hysteria was over, more than 200 people had been accused of witchcraft. 19 men and women were hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death under heavy stones after refusing to enter a plea. His final words, according to legend, were, "More weight." The unraveling of the hysteria. But as summer turned to fall, doubts began to creep in. Some of the most respected citizens of Salem, people who were above suspicion, had been accused. The governor's own wife was named as a witch. Soon, the people of Massachusetts realized that something had gone terribly wrong. The use of spectral evidence was called into question. How could an invisible, unprovable spirit be used as evidence to send someone to their death? And slowly, the madness that had gripped the village began to dissipate. The truth behind the trials. As we look back on the Salem Witch Trials today, it's clear that the accusations were not rooted in reality. Historians believe that a variety of factors may have contributed to the hysteria. The strict, oppressive nature of Puritan society, the deep-seated fear of the devil, and the precarious position of women and outsiders in the community all played a role. For some, the trials were a convenient way to get rid of enemies or those who didn't fit in. For others, it was a case of mass hysteria, a perfect storm of fear, superstition, and social tension. And what of Tituba? Her confession, likely coerced, was the result of fear. She was trapped in a world that saw her as the other, an easy scapegoat in a time of chaos. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a dark reminder of what can happen when fear overrides reason and when society turns on its most vulnerable members. It's a story of human frailty, of how easily we can fall into the grip of hysteria and of the tragic consequences that can follow. The year 1692 may be far behind us, but the lessons of Salem remain ever relevant. In the end, the true evil was not witches or black magic, it was fear itself. And so ends our tale of the Salem Witch Trials, a moment in history when fear ruled and reason was drowned out by suspicion. Let it serve as a warning, a ghostly whisper from the past, reminding us to be vigilant, not of the supernatural, but of the dangers that arise when we turn against each other. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for more tales of the fascinating and strange.